Okay, hello and welcome to the November 1st weekly JupyterLab call. I have lost sight, 11. We have 11 people on the call today, and we have a sparse agenda. So today's your day if you want to talk. If you haven't already, please sign in. The link should be in the chat, and why don't we get started? Fred added something on the agenda and he's not here today, so I will read what it says. It's a 4.1 question about plugin manager access. And the question is, should we keep it as a toolbar button in the settings panel or move it to the extension manager? I don't have a strong opinion here. I have an intuition, but
I think
well,
I would say the extension manager side panel seems like a better place.
okay. That's sort of what I'm thinking too. Does anyone disagree? We can write that as a note for him and move on if there's agreement there.
Is there merit to having it in both places? Because I feel like people who want to configure plugins might look in both places.
If it is implemented in the same way, yes. I.e., if it is a setting, but if it's not a setting, then if you don't get it in the extension manager as a setting, basically, then I would say no, because then you have to sync up two values. So I don't really know.
Right.
I think that it depends on implementation.
Okay. Although it looks like both buttons are just like performing an action, running a command. I'm not sure what that does.
Oh, this is okay. So it's not, the button state doesn't rely on any setting, I guess.
I honestly think, I mean, to me, it makes sense that the JSON settings editor is in the settings editor, the settings panel, but I think there's less of a case for editing plugins from there. Certainly, I feel like it just fits with the extension manager because those are dealing with related items.
Okay.
I think it's a weird place for the plugin manager to go is in that settings panel.
Okay. Could you please write a note in that bullet point?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes. Now. Yes. Sorry, I didn't. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the reasoning why it got added here is partially that many extensions were implementing a feature to disable part of the extension which was exposed in the settings. So there was like a setting enabled or disabled. And now with the transition to plugin manager, allowing users to switch specific plugins on and off, it kind of hints users that if they don't see this enable disabled setting in a future version, maybe that is in the plugin manager, and maybe they will intuitively go to the settings panel to try to disable an optional feature of an extension. That's not to say that it shouldn't be in the extension manager, but extension manager is really doing something different. It allows to install things from like PyPy, whereas plugin manager, what it does, the only thing that it allows you to do is to flick status from true to false, etc., on whether a specific plugin is enabled or disabled.
So, what's the most coherent state in your mind?
I think if it's it might be beneficial to have it in both places, like the link, because it's just a link to open a new main area widget. So I would say it's fine to keep it in the toolbar for as long as we are not constrained by the space. Like if there were 5 other buttons on this toolbar in settings, I would hear a strong argument to possibly remove that. But for as long as it's not the case, I think I prefer to keep it there. But I also don't have any case against including it in the extension manager, including another button or another link of kind there. But it's also not a strong opinion either way.
Maybe jot that down too in the notes, right? Like just as feedback to the friend. Okay, cool. So maybe while Mike is writing this down, Nick, do you want to add a bullet point and talk about what you were talking about?
Let me see. I don't know if it'll. Let me see if my wait. So many hacking these. I can kind of narrate, I guess, while I'm seeing it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, if somebody identifies an accessibility problem in something complex like iPad widgets, the fix requires a change to Lumino, because Lumino is the underpinning to iPad widgets, but also for both the supported host applications. How do you give a person the ability to see how a change in Lumino, which may have knock-on changes in the application and the iPad widgets extension, as represented by 4 different PRs, to see that change actually make their use of Jupyter tools better? That is the elevator pitch of why it's relevant. So a couple people are already in here. They heard my pre-baked cake. What are some thoughts that people have about how you would do that?
Is the answer JupyterLite somehow?
Yeah, I mean that's the proposed one, but wasn't trying to back it anyway. Yeah, so we had a binder that did this specifically for accessibility, and it was complex, and now binder doesn't work reliably for this, because we can barely keep the JupyterLab running. So
right,
the pitch is, would maybe where it would live, I guess in JupyterLite is where it would live. It would live under the JupyterLite org thing, and not in the JupyterLite repo itself. We would need some clever GitHub actions on the form-based issues, because you'd need to be able to say, here's the version of, I want this branch, or sorry, I want this PR of this repo, this PR of this repo, this PR of this repo, this PR of this repo. And maybe, maybe a kind of a, Git puller, whatever, for a specific example document. Maybe you got to make a gist of an example document or something and load like that. And load the whole thing inside a build on Read the Docs. Is basically, since GitLab or GitHub, it's very hard to get to the built asset at a predictable URL that doesn't use some shady proxy. Yeah, and then so if that did exist, how would we make that existence of that capability known to different parties? So would the automation be able to say, hey, this, you create the issue creates a PR, and then the PR posts back to the other PRs and says, this PR is part of a JupyterLite demo playground thing. Yeah, so that's kind of a pitch.
Okay, I mean, in my mind, this works most coherently in a world where JupyterLite is either one of the example applications in the JupyterLab repo, or it's a branch in the JupyterLab repo or something, basically, so that you can take the branch that contains the PR and apply it with reasonable confidence that if there's breakage, it's because you did something wrong and it's not something about the Jupyter lightness of being.
Well, yeah, but then you also gotta have a kernel. We've been trying to get the kernels out of the core JupyterLite. Like, you don't want to take on Zeus and you don't want to take on Pyodide for two different reasons. And I don't know if William wants to jump in
Is it
on
licensing, or
what's that?
is it a licensing issue, or packaging is hard, or what? What are we talking about?
It's a complexity thing. I mean, in 2023, we still don't have universal web assembly binaries. We've got Mscripton. Some stuff like William's doing doesn't use Mscripton. Some other people are doing other stuff, and whatever. So basically, Pyodide build, if you want a custom package, is not simple today.
Okay.
I'm working on that. And
Yeah.
if you want the Zeus one, it's got a bunch of other limitations, which it could be feasible inside of a full-on build system, but it's not really, like, we don't want to force the Conda opinion in a bunch of places where it's not appropriate yet. So yeah, I mean, getting light into core would be great, but we are still moving fast and breaking things. I don't know. What is William?
Oh yeah, no, I don't. This is more like
Wasn't
I
it not
don't.
simple? Agreed.
Yeah, I guess I just don't imagine a world where a PR has a pre-built light that contains the content of that PR until you're done moving fast and breaking things.
Okay, so then the problem is light. If light doesn't ship notebook, then it's kind of broken. Is kind of the definition that we put on it today. So now would that also require that notebook go inside of the JupyterLab repo so that we can build the full application?
Okay, so I mean,
and then IPy widgets. So then now, how can I get my IPy?
okay,
like, this is, I think,
yeah,
standing outside of the house is the way that this could work.
okay, that's compelling. Yes.
Yeah. And hell, I would love, I think you should be able to drop IPython into this, right? So anybody that was playing along at home, we dropped a dependency, we changed it to signature, and it broke auto reload. Auto reload works somehow in JupyterLite. I don't understand how it works in Pyodide. I don't understand the import system, and I don't understand what auto reload does, but it's sufficiently advanced evil to work. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I just got to do it. And normalize that as, would people be angry if their PR was built in a JupyterLite setting, and how it performed in JupyterLite was part of whether that PR could be reviewed and or denied because it broke JupyterLite? I guess that's kind of the question.
I mean, what are the grounds for anger? I don't understand the question really, like, categorically.
I don't know, man. don't like JupyterLab. I don't know, man. It's not an official product, and it doesn't necessarily follow the code of conduct. And I'm just looking
yeah,
for
but
governance boo-boos, you know?
I think it should, though. I think it should be an official Jupyter product. I think it should enter core whenever you guys are ready to bring it. I think it should be part of the JupyterLab org. I think notebooks should be part of JupyterLab too, frankly. I think we should have a JupyterLab and notebook subproject for the front ends. And, you know, not
Seems to
that
me
long repos. Please go ahead, whoever that was.
that was me, Ely. It seems to me like a win to have that extra check against JupyterLite, but maybe until it's an official project that, you know, follows the COC and stuff, failing that check wouldn't be a like blocker for merging. Purely additive until it's official.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can write a bot that goes through the PRs and does some clever stuff by pulling light from a special place and, you know, making that work for sure. And that to me sounds like a precursor to anything more official, I guess. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, okay. That's fair. I guess, okay, there was something else that someone just said.
Well,
Let me think.
I guess so. I could ask. Personally, I don't feel like I have enough expertise to dive into some of the parts of this discussion, but I guess one of the things I wonder is this kind of orthogonal to like the just lab build process? I mean, I think the lab build process is very complex, and I'm wondering, how does the build process in general relate to this discussion? Like the tools that we use and the process as it works today. I guess that just gets absorbed by all of that stuff would just come into this new process, sort of.
well, I mean, okay, so what you have to do to build JupyterLite is to have JupyterLab on the machine, and then its assets are used in the construction of light. So if the lab you're using is the one in the branch that contains a PR, then it's the process of building JupyterLite, but you're giving it a different lab to begin with.
Kinda. Yeah, I mean, things are easiest if they're actual packages at rest. So if there's actually assets in shared, you know, sys prefix, shared Jupyter Lab extension, or shared Jupyter Lab staging, whatever, wherever the hell the actual stuff goes. That's the best. Yeah, and we got a lot of do it stuff in there that handles a lot of the stuff. Like we got to line up all the tildes and the dollar and the carets, and all those things have to be just right, or you don't get a working application. And then all the package JSON's got to be just right, and all that. Again, all this does work. Like you can do this. It's just it's not feasible from the outside because, as I mentioned in the earlier call, like there's nothing, there's very little that tells you I changed this file. What do I need to rebuild? Do I need to clear out a cache? Because this is going to invalidate a cache somewhere. Does this invalidate a test result that I had previously? And so I think without like really leaning into NX, which I do not like, or do it, or make, or sconce, or pants, or anything that helped you understand these things,
You just
then we
made
can
up one.
start. What's that?
Yeah, you just one. I'm sure one of those names is made up.
Oh, we're gonna play Stump the Packager. Oh snap! Oh snap! No, they're all real. I swear. And you know, anything like that would help this kind of scenario, right? As it is, there's just no way to know, and You just got to go fire up that big build, and it takes a couple minutes, and it just compounds on it. Like, and Lumino still uses rollup, right? So it's like every build system, no one's going to choose all the build systems as a thing that they want to learn. Is all.
I think to myself, right, like trying to, I guess, build a system that will tell you what needs to be rebuilt or rerun sounds very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, just determining whether the PR that you've opened in lab is an appropriate thing to even run inside Light isn't 100% clear, right? So like JupyterLab has a bunch of Python commands, for example, like Jupyter lab extension list, or I think we have like a settings export or whatever, right? And like you make a PR, fix something in there. We'd have to have something that tells, basically the bot would have to know, okay, this one is irrelevant to trying to compile into Jupyter Lite and giving people a link.
So we have labels. The bot applies labels based on
Yeah,
what files
true.
changed. We could use that. And also, I think there is a comment in the chat that it could be a manual request, just a comment
True.
with a bot. Please do that.
Yeah, those are both good points. I think we could talk about this for a long time. Does anyone have any final thoughts? Maybe we shouldn't, and instead should use the rest of the time for both what Mike wants to talk about and then the triage.
I just want to add a comment about Light moving forward. Like in the past few weeks, we've mentioned a few times the idea of doing user testing, and our experience with Notebooks for All is that static HTML files are the easiest to ship around and test with people. So to me, there's a huge benefit accessibility-wise and UX-wise in people being able to test out features if there's a static HTML build that they can rely on. At least in our experience, that's been a little bit more reliable than, say, Binder or building it yourself. Well, not a whole single HTML file, but you go to an HTML page, and that's instead of a Binder page, and you're waiting for Docker stuff. But that link would help a lot of testers, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you don't mean shipping the file to people. You just mean a hosted static page,
Yeah.
so that no one worries about it. Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
the last times I've tried to load a Binder, every single time has failed. So fair enough.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing too is that you can use the Jupyter Lite config file as an input. So you can actually like systematize the design in a way where you're like, hey, if I toggle these features, so on and so forth. So there are added benefits to it overall.
Yeah. No, I agree. Okay. Let's move on from this. We have half the call left, and we can maybe get some other stuff done. Mike, you're up.
So first, just a reminder that there are pull requests which need review, and some of them are labeled with needs review label. There is a link at the top of the agenda, and I'm pasting that in the chat as well. There are also pull requests which don't have this label and need review. That's another topic. And there is also some labels which are applied during the triage to highlight issues which need design or need discussion. One of these issues I wanted to highlight is a discussion about kernel panel, or rather in the running sidebar of JupyterLab, there is a sub panel for running kernels, and I will drop the link in the chat. The discussion started with how we can improve the use of space, and some people provided mockups. I provided my mockups, and there is a possibly interesting discussion on whether the kernel should be exposed as a living entity which has an ID and maybe even is given a name, And I don't mean a kernel spec, I mean individual kernels. So some people request that they would like to name kernels. So maybe that's something to think about while we are still at the design and discussion stage in this one.
So I worked on this feature, and I'm not very attached to what's there. If you have a better way of organizing this, here's the problem, right? The problem was that what we called kernels were sessions. They weren't kernels. It was purely false. And that there was no way to list kernels that didn't have a session wrapped around it, which is a new functionality we do want. Anything that answers those things, but organizes the space better and wastes fewer lines and, you know, achieves the goals you lay out in this issue without reconflating session and kernel, sounds really good. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry for saying that word, but that's the API you have to hit to actually implement this. You have to hit an API called kernels and another one called sessions, and we shouldn't have called it sessions because everything is called a session. Yeah, I don't know.
Named kernels make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Do any other UIs implement something like that?
What do you mean?
Does anybody else have the ability to name kernels? Are there any notebook applications out there that have like something similar to that?
I don't know.
I almost feel like you could inline the kernel on the notebook, on the list of notebooks, potentially.
So there are good arguments against doing that. And there are pretty pictures and there's lots of discussion. So I do encourage to read it through. And
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
I think that there are still some unsolved questions and questions of what the users would prefer. So even if you end up only liking the existing comments rather than adding a new suggestion, that's very valuable.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I didn't see the ones lower down.
With a feature like this, does it get to thinking about multi-kernel notebooks at all? Or does it start to make any cases for something along those lines?
Well, I'm not sure, but here's a use case that I think is probably not familiar to people, but it's a thing that partly drove my thinking about this, and it was, imagine a desktop application that's got its own language engine. Let's say Python for fun, and it does stuff with it. Like it's an application blender, right? And it's doing stuff, and it implements the Jupyter kernel protocol so that you could be doing stuff in Blender, then you fire up Notebook and you see in your list of available kernels a currently running active kernel that is from Blender, and you can, you know, debug it. You can go in there and look at what's in there. You can do some work with it in that same kernel space. The last version of Lab wouldn't have given you a way to see that kernel. This version does, but like you still might not know enough about it, right? Because it might just say Python 3 and you have no idea this Python 3 comes from Blender or whatever. So still might not be that useful. Okay. I mean, these mock-ups look pretty good. And I don't think you'll find like, yeah, I don't think the people on the call right now have strong opinions on this. And I think the discussion that you've had here is, in the issue, is fairly broad. Are you stuck? Is there like a thing that needs to be decided that you don't have enough consensus on? Or did you want to just seek more opinions? Like, what was your aim?
In particular, I was somewhat interested whether other people also think that naming kernels make sense. That there is another suggestion of showing the process identifier number in there. I don't think that's something that we can do currently, but I was also thinking about adding like generic kernel data which kernel can expose about itself, because kind of not all kernels live in a process. Maybe they are just a thread. Maybe every kernel has an identifier, but anyways, they are just it's not a high priority for me, so I'm not actively working on this one. I just want to have a rather strong community consensus before starting any work to improve the UI here. Just seeking opinions for now.
On this one, I think the one thing that I'm curious about I'm not seeing in the issue is how I'd go and choose this. So like if I was in a notebook, how would I go and activate these named kernels? And when I think about it, part of me is wondering if if we're adding a name, do we add a description also? Yeah, I'm curious about the choosing part. The browser looks like it makes sense, but then how am I going to go and discover that thing?
I think we can create a dedicated issue about naming kernels and explore that in that one. I will do that. Thanks.
I think you could just show the name of the kernel selector, right?
Yeah, you absolutely could, but if you're blind,
Oh
then
yeah.
there's there's a lot of there's pronunciation problems with the kernel names. So having naming might actually be more of an accessible label. But then there's the added level of ambiguity. Like maybe the description says that this kernel has access to this many resources or something, but there could be more detail and more metadata. Part of me is wondering if when we do this, if it doesn't affect the kernel spec in a way, and we're adding more features to the kernel spec.
So, but kernel spec is served by a REST endpoint, and it's populated by a file that is created by the author of the kernel. Is that right?
Right.
So in the cases where we have these external third-party kernels that we want Jupyter to connect to, I guess it's still just their responsibility to produce a kernel spec file and put it in the correct place on the file system for the Jupyter REST endpoint to pick up.
Yeah.
I imagine. Okay, so
But,
I'm just trying to figure.
but part of me is thinking like we could probably make a kernel maker extension that would be pretty sweet and make that a little bit easier. So right now it doesn't seem great, but I think there's a way to make it great.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. I lost. Oh, here we go. I found it. Okay. So we are looking to release 4.1, and the feature freeze was supposed to be today, or is supposed to be today. And we have some PRs and issues to triage. Is there anyone who's willing to drive a triage session? And I can also stop recording. Well, is there anyone that wants to say anything before we stop recording? Okay, cool. I'm gonna stop recording. Brace yourselves.